Hello, I am Joel McLeod.
And I'm Roland Tanner.
And welcome to the 905er. The last 2 years for Ontario Liberal leader Bonnie Crombie have been rough. Her leadership has failed to win numerous recent by-elections, keeping the Ontario Liberals out of official party status in the legislature. Polls have shown her plateauing at 25%, and a recent Main Street research poll showed a mathematical impossibility of the Ontario Liberals or the Ontario NDP forming a minority or majority government. The Ontario Liberals, however, are hoping to turn that around. In early December 2024, the party held its inaugural leadership dinner, a fundraiser where the party raked in $1.65 million, badly needed to fill its coffers ahead of what is expected to be a spring 2025 election. The bigger news, though, was her speech. Bonnie Crombie attempted to nullify Doug Ford's branding campaign of her as a Trudeau Carbon Tax Liberal by saying that the carbon tax is a bad idea and that she would not support one in Ontario. She also stated in that speech her complete support for police funding in Ontario cities. This rightward shift in the Ontario Liberal Party is seemingly alienating many longtime progressives within the party. Responses to this shift on social media have seen many progressives stating that they feel homeless. Their priorities and viewpoints are not reflected in the Ontario Liberals anymore. With progressives losing their faith in Bonnie Crombie and her efforts to try and win over Doug Ford supporters, the question is, will this rebranding of the Ontario Liberal leader help the chances of the party recover from its 2018 historic loss? More important, will it be enough for the former mayor of Mississauga to win over a majority of 905 seats? To dive into these questions, we reached out to Evan Scrimshaw. Evan is a former Liberal staffer who hosts Scrimshaw Unscripted, a podcast focusing on Canadian politics. He has been critical of the Ontario Liberal Party's decisions as of late, and we thought it would be interesting to hear his thoughts on whether or not this Bonnie Crombie 2.0 will be enough to turn the tide in the party's favor. If you enjoyed this podcast, please consider supporting us by visiting our website at 905er.ca and click on the supporter tab to contribute to keep us going. Only $5 a month helps us out and goes a long way for us to provide this content for you. In addition, you'll get exclusive access to our 905er Extra Minutes, bonus episodes, which are just available for our supporters. Visit our website at 905er.ca or click on the link in our show notes. Thank you to Evan Scrimshaw for coming on to the 905er. Evan, thank you very much for taking the time from your Substack and your own podcast, Scrimshaw Unscripted, to come on and talk about, Bonnie Crombie and the Ontario Liberal Party's electoral chances. We're going to say next year when the next provincial election happens.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Always happy to hop on basically any podcast because I just like yapping about this stuff. Yeah, not very optimistic about Miss Crombie's chances.
Well, okay, we're recording this just to give our listeners a bit of context. We're recording this the week of the big kind of rebrand, the big shot in the arm to the Ontario Liberals that they're going to go into whenever this. Chances are it's probably going to be held 2025 next general election in Ontario, and this is supposed to be the shot in the arm to fire up the team, get the warhammers pounding, and go out and win this thing. And it's kind of my take on it from what I've seen online, what I'm hearing from people is it's a lot of people are feeling actually disheartened. The base is feeling, let's be honest, I think betrayed, let down. They feel the party has turned their backs on them, and I don't know. Maybe I'm reading too much into the feeling of the moment, but that's my take on this. Evan, what's your opinion on the matter?
I don't know if Bonnie Crombie is betraying us because I don't know that we had any reason to ever think this would be different. I was I was going to say famously to people who are chronically online and pay too much attention to this, one of Nate Erskine Smith's biggest proponents in the leadership race. I have always been extremely skeptical of Bonnie Crombie because Bonnie Crombie has tried to be everything to everybody. She is an anti-carbon tax crusader who was elected as an MP on the Green Shift platform of Stéphane Dion. She was a NIMBY mayor who's now trying to be a YIMBY leader of the Ontario Liberals. She is a career politician claiming to be an outsider. She was supposed to be this fundraising goddess who, I mean, had a very good fundraising dinner this week, but like has failed to raise the money to air it, as far as I'm aware, a single TV ad in the course of a year where she is getting slammed on broadcast. Every single ad, basically, especially during last year's NHL and NBA playoffs, were Ford ads. Crombie is a fundamentally chameleonic person who is asking the left of the party, people like me, to, people who worked for Nate, people who supported Nate, people who, have voted NDP in the past, which I did in 2018, to grin, bear it, and accept that for the purposes of electoral necessity, essentially, that you have to vote for her. And the problem with that is Bonnie Crombie has not given the left of the party and the center left and left in the province at large any reason to believe that if we do this for her, if we vote for half a loaf, and I'm not even sure it is half a loaf, but if you accept that it's half a loaf and that we have to be the ones to do it, we have no reason to think that the half loaf is even going to show up when she says so.
I mean, I was looking at well, actually, I think it was in your article, you mentioned the kind of statistic, the polling statistics are around right now, and they're very depressing. And I thought I loved the title of your article the other day, 1 year of Crombie, we're all completely fucked. That's pretty much how I feel right now. But the polling numbers right now is like, well, the PCs are on about 44%. Liberals are on 25%, the NDP are on 23% or something. And it's like, wow, that's dreadful. Until you add the Liberal and the NDP numbers together, and it's like, well, there's a majority government for you. If someone can just get the NDP and the Liberal voters to sort of vote for one party or the other. It's the old cliche, but it kind of, I can't get away from it. It's like moving to the right, as Crombie has clearly done, with throwing the carbon tax under the bus and kind of throwing Trudeau under the bus and all these other things, that makes that kind of unification of the left, of the progressive parties, of the center and the left, more unlikely rather than more likely, doesn't it? I mean, isn't this at the heart of the problem that we've had with both Del Duca and now even worse with Crombie, that moving to the right is actually the wrong direction?
So Hunter Difton wrote a great article for the National Observer last year during the leadership race on the specific math of why moving right is not some sort of grand solution. I think there is some merit to the idea that the world at large, North America in general, is getting less open to specific progressive ideas. I think especially on like law, order, crime, drug policy, the sort of like panacea of 2019 and we've won the war. I think that is very, I think that's wrong. You can see that in the way that, progressive mayors in America are being, primaried out or have terrible approvals or recalled out in California. But being willing to accept that you need to move to the center, that you need to meet people where they are on very specific issues, is not the same thing as decrying the end of identity politics and prioritizing the ending of encampments in your leader's dinner speech, especially given that Bonnie Crombie, was the mayor of Mississauga, who that mayoral record does not seem particularly impressive in the way that I know it's not particularly impressive, despite not really caring about Mississauga, is that I have not heard Bonnie Crombie mention a single thing that she did as mayor of Mississauga as evidence that she would be a good premier. But two, like, okay, So you want to move right on encampments. You want to make that a high priority, like 6 hours before you gave that speech. Your
Mhm.
own MPs voted to close a majority of safe ejection sites, which makes it more likely, not less, that a 9-year-old walking home from school, cutting through a park, is going to see antisocial, unhealthy behavior of the kind that you would like to stop by closing the encampments, clearing the encampments.
I just want to interject on this note because just before we came on, the Toronto Star published a story by Robert Benzies that basically we covered this on the podcast a little while ago. As you know, 12 mayors from around the province signed a letter asking for the notwithstanding clause to be used to clear the encampments. Doug Ford basically said he's going to give them that power. So that note of Bonnie Crombie trying to say, well, I'm going to be tough on encampments, that Doug Ford just kind of took that away from her, in all fairness. I mean, Doug, like I guess what I'm saying is that big thing, she's going to be I'm going to be all right on encampments. I think that's now a null point going into the next election.
I mean, we'll see how quickly any of these cities actually achieve
True.
any progress, given the track record of Ontario cities. They probably won't. Um, but but again, even on Crombie's own terms, and this is the column I published on Thursday. Like even on Crombie's own terms, her leadership doesn't make any sense. Her policies don't make any sense. It's all this sort of kabuki theater of like nonsense proclamations and a couple of good policies in there. I'm not saying that she's like the worst, and frankly, a lot more of my ire is focused on Meredith Styles, but like Bonnie Crombie decide like this is a relaunch. I have gotten chastised by this for saying this by people, but like Bonnie Crombie lined up a star profile, a healthcare announcement, a leaders dinner, and again, for whatever you think of her Tuesday night speech, that was certainly newsy, and she has mostly controlled the news narrative this week. This is a relaunch, whether you want to call it that or not. It's a reintroduction of her. And even on her own terms, this doesn't make any sense. Because if you want to make encampments your whole thing, well, you don't have a strategy to solve these problems. You didn't pair this sort of big focus on encampments with any sort of in greater investment in social housing or more funding for drug treatment beds or any sort of thing that would make progressives think that, oh, you're not just sounding like John Rustad or Doug Ford. And the problem is that sort of like love the soundbite doesn't really work, right? Crombie's answer on Wednesday in the legislature is, I've always opposed a carbon tax. It took the PCs less than a day to find a quote of hers from when she was running for office saying that Canada needs to put a price on carbon. She's claiming that identity politics is dead. Well, I don't think Bonnie had any problem with identity politics when she wrote that nonsense star op-ed during the leadership race, calling Nate Erskine-Smith a sexist and saying she has seen how ageism and sexism have hurt so many women. But now identity politics needs to go away. Okay, so you're just not a legitimate, whatever you think of these arguments, you're just not a legitimate salesperson for these vehicles, especially when you flat out lie. If she had said, I used to support a carbon tax, I realized it's wrong, it's not right for this context, okay, you could agree or disagree with that, but that's at least, honest sounding enough. Oh, I've always opposed to carbon tax. No, you didn't. If you didn't, you wouldn't have run for Stéphane Dion. You wouldn't have said that in 2008.
Well, the
And
other point,
it's still trying to win. It's still trying to win on PC territory, and I don't see how you can do that. You can't out Doug. He's gonna take, like, everyone knows what he is. Love him, loathe him. We understand what Doug Ford is. We understand what the PCs are. To sort of say, well, I'm going to be just as much of a hard ass, nasty piece of work as the PCs. I mean, it's not even like, oh, we're like the PCs, but we're nicer. She's not even saying that. It's like, we're going to be like the PCs and just as big dickheads, to be honest. I don't get what the point of that is. It's like you're turning off your core voters, and I mean, it seems to be kind of the classic mistake that's been made in the States and other parts of the world, where you just take your progressive voters for granted. Because where else are you going to go? But here in Ontario, we have somewhere else they can go, and they've gone there for the last 2 elections. I don't get the point of all this. It's like you've got to do things that attract to the progressive voters, and she's just like running away from it. I mean, okay, there's stuff about more doctors, and that's great, and I mean, so there are, like you say, there are good things, but it seems so stupid, for want of a better word. And some of the quotes you give in your article, I mean, they really underline that point. It's like, well, you really, she basically says, well, a year ago I didn't know what the hell I was getting into. When I got here, I thought, I'm experienced, I'm a polished leader. 78% of Mississauga voted for me. I thought it would be easier. It's like, what kind of idiot are you that you thought it would be easy? I mean, it's really disturbing.
I want to know who let her give that quote to the Toronto Star, though.
Yeah.
Like, that entire interview should have been just completely kiboshed the minute that question was asked. Say, no, get out. There's no good answer to that question. Get out. That's just my 2 cents.
No, I agree with that. I think the other interesting, the most revealing part of that for me, I mean, that star piece was like a bomb, and it was one of these things where it was a Sunday, so I'm watching football and sort of, whatever. My phone's down for 8 minutes. I'm focused on whatever game it was, and I come back and I have like 5 different text messages from different people. I have 4 Twitter DMs, and I'm like, and it's just people not even explaining why they're texting me. They're just kind of reacting. And I'm like, did somebody die? Did Justin Trudeau resign? Like, what happened here, guys? And it's just the star column, because those quotes are terrible. It's terrible staff work from her, but spoiler alert, you are responsible for bad staff work. The thing for me about Bonnie and is like she led with a tax cut that doesn't help anybody in the bottom 50% of Ontarians. She then followed up with a good healthcare proposal to hire more doctors, but like, hiring more doctors is not particularly sort of partisan or ideological, right? Everyone agrees more doctors is a good thing. Like, there is a real need to drive that PC vote share down. Like, they can't be in the 40s. They have to fall back to the 30s if you want to pull this off. But the problem is twofold. One, a lot of people who vote in federal elections but didn't vote in 2022, right? That group of voters, the 15 or 20% of Ontarians who voted in 2021 federally but didn't vote in 22 provincially, those lean left, right? Those were not a distinctly Fordian group of people. And so, with the fact that provincial elections just get less media attention, they don't dominate the news, they are not the first, second, and third item on the national or on CTV national news every night, they're not the front page of the Globe and the Post every single day, there is a slightly higher bar to actually get your voters out, because there is just less like, I kind of have to, it's in the news, I remember it's there, I'm going to do it. That's number one. And she's not making any of us feel good about our choices. Number 2, and this is the thing that keeps getting me, is Tim Hudak in 2011 mostly ran as McGuinty but less corrupt. Now, there were some weird moments in that campaign from Hudak. I'm not going to pretend there weren't, but his like organizing principle of that campaign was, I'm not going to rock the boat. I'm not going to cut too much spending. I'm not going to be too radical. I'm not Mike Harris 2.0. You can trust me. And that campaign got like 33% of the vote, and nobody really cared. And everyone just said, okay, well, if you're giving me McGuinty light or McGuinty, I'm just going to reelect McGuinty. And again, he came 1 seat short of a majority government, despite 4 years of bad polls and corruption scandals. Crombie isn't giving anybody any reason to vote Liberal. And you've now got the Greens, who routinely poll at 7. You've got the NDP, who are still in the 20s, and you have staff and advisors who are relying on private polling that has them in a better place and refusing to listen to anybody who doesn't toe the party line and who are more focused on chastising me for calling it a relaunch than they are on listening to any of my substantive critiques.
Well, on that note about the staffers relying on the polls, I do find interesting. Main Street Research recently released an Ontario poll that basically said there is a 0% chance that Bonnie Crombie or Merritt Stiles will form any form of government, minority or majority. There's 0% chance right now in the polls, and I gotta think. I've never seen that before. I've never seen any poll that comes out and says there's a 0% chance. Mathematically, it's impossible right now for you to win anything. And I gotta just imagine, like, what must be going through the back, like the party office's minds, that they're looking and saying, like, their polls have got to be telling something similar. Like there is no path to victory here. And that's I look at it, I say, is it possible that Bonnie Crombie, who was a mayor of a major Ontario 905 city, mayor of Mississauga, could lose Mississauga to Doug Ford? And I'm thinking it's a very real possibility. Like, she may not win any seats in the 905 next election right now. And I'm just putting it out there. Like,
I have her winning 2 seats in Mississauga, and that is with an incredibly generous and vaguely anti-statistical sort of boost adjustment to her for the fact that she's the former mayor of Mississauga. But like, it is not exceedingly clear that she is going to win anything in Mississauga. She went 4 points backwards in Milton compared to the 2022 result in the by-election earlier this year. Burlington, Oakville, they don't look like they're falling. The Liberals are nowhere to be found in Brampton unless they have some star candidate somewhere in the works who can engineer a Brampton only swing. Ajax maybe falls. They have a decent night, but like, this is the point, is that, like, no, it's really bad. And if your whole thing was ability to win the suburbs, was ability to win commuter country, suburban moms, whatever, and you're looking at, I updated my model after Main Street, so I have all the private, all the public data in there. Yeah, you're at like 15 seats, 16, whatever. I don't even remember what the number was. It wasn't good. No, I think it might have actually been 12. It was 12 was the number. I'm being generous.
So they would just barely get like official party status, and then they'd be able to open a research office on the public dime.
And that was an incredibly like tenuous 12 as well. It's not like it's a rock solid 12 by any means. Their heads are in the sand. They genuinely think they've done a great job, because again, what I refer to as a relaunch, I was chastised by people in the party, and it's like, I didn't say this to them because I was trying to be polite, but it's like, I read it in the column that went up on Thursday morning. It's like, if you consider the last year to be a success, stagnation in the polls, her favorables have gotten significantly worse. She has been defined as something that she's not, which is, say, a tax and spend liberal, by millions and millions of dollars PC ads. If you consider this a success, God forbid, what's a failure?
And I mean, my feeling is that they're open to the risk that, what the NDP do between elections doesn't really matter. When the writ drops, the leader can, as you've seen as we saw in 2018, as we saw with Jack Layton's final sort of kick at the can, that an NDP leader can, if they just look more presentable than the Liberal who's on offer, can pick up a huge number of votes, a huge amount of popularity during the writ period, just because people are so sick of the alternative. And it's like, okay, we'll put a vote over here. Don't really care about the policy, but so they're really risking. Last time with Del Duca against Horvath, Horvath, everyone knew what they were dealing with again. She wasn't going to suddenly sort of miracles weren't going to happen. Merritt Stiles was like, hey, as a new person, if Merritt Stiles does slightly better than expected, that could really hit the Liberals very badly. I think, you know, well, that's the risk anyway. And you know, it's so kind of pathetic that we're basically heading into sort of a rerun of the last election, but with, you know, did they learn nothing last time around? That you know, well, first of all, you know, pick another politician with the very long history, you know, who's tied to unpopular governments. You know, it just seems so ridiculous that they thought that this would somehow turn anything around. And I mean, are there any sort of hopeful points that can we put to sort of put the other side of the argument here that I'm missing out on?
Doug Ford is the least popular premier of Ontario. Voters have generally shown an increase in recent times in their willingness to vote tactically. Ford hasn't called the election yet, and in theory, it's theoretically possible that this Auditor General's report could crash his numbers sufficiently to maybe delay the election and buy the Liberals some more time to spend this, you know, $1.5 billion that they just raised at the leaders' dinner on some TV ads. I don't really believe any of the things I mean, they're facts, but like, I don't really believe it's going to happen. But the sort of case for optimism is campaigns have shown the ability to move things as people start to care. Remember, in 2018, people were sort of locked in this, like, you know, Liberals and NDP were both kind of stuck, mired in the same place. Liberals tanked, the NDP rose. The NDP got to a near tie before botching the debate and not having a team. Bonnie, for all of my criticism of her, is collecting a very good slate of candidates. Tyler Watt, Nepean, Vince. Oh God, I'm blank on his last name. Gasparo, I believe. Apologies to Vince in Eglinton Lawrence. Like, there is a good candidate of people around her, and I think if Ford in 2018 was very effective at tying Horvath to nut bar candidates who, you know, oh, who's going to be in an NDP cabinet? Well, nobody knew, and nobody had any faith that an NDP cabinet wouldn't be stalked by far left, you know, radical ideologues. And the other point of optimism, and this will not be particularly fun to a certain, you know, kind of progressive in Ontario, is that Merritt Stiles sucks. Merritt Stiles is horrible. Merritt Stiles flirted with letting Sarah Jama back. Merritt Stiles allowed one of the first big NDP announcements to be safety zones around drag bars. Her housing plan's a joke that's been repeated by every serious person. And if Stiles can fall to 18% by election day, the Greens are polling 7, so they'll really get 5, because that's just what always happens with minor parties. You know, that's 4 or 5% that gets the Liberals to 30-ish. Maybe they take a couple points off Ford. You get to 32. I'm not saying I think it's going to happen. I think it's possible. And at 32, they probably win 35 seats, and you know, they have a base to build on that they don't have now.
But here's the problem I see with all that. You're talking numbers, and I'll be honest, I don't think politics is really about numbers. It's about people. I mean, I think we took a lesson from south of the border with what we saw of the Democratic implosion there, and a lot of people just say what you will about Donald Trump reaching out and being, you know, the misogynistic, racist, anti-Islamophobic, just a complete asshole. There were people who just said, "Yeah, but the Democrats aren't speaking to me. The progressive vote aren't speaking to the issues that will keep me up late at night." And I get the sense that that's happening here in Canada as well. The progressive parties, progressive politicians, whether it's Justin Trudeau in Ottawa, Bonnie Crombie and Merritt Stiles here at the provincial level, and progressive mayors kind of on the ground, there's a sense of you're not talking about the issues that are keeping mom and dad awake at night, namely affordability, your paycheck, and whether or not you're going to like. I want to come back, and it's a bit of a rant. Bear with me, but the issue of the homeless encampments, it's not the homeless. The issue isn't the homeless. It's what the homeless represent. It's the fear that people have of, I am one bad paycheck. I am one bad turn of life events away from not making my rent, not being able to afford food on the table for my family, of maybe something worse happening, and I'm stuck there. And I think that's what people are afraid of when they see homeless encampments. And yes, they have the issues of mental health and addictions and all that. I'm not negating that as well. But there is people look at that and they're saying, I could be in one bad break from joining that. And nobody talks about that fear. Doug Ford doesn't want to talk about it because he's failing epically on that front. But I also don't see Bonnie Crombie or Merritt Stiles saying, yeah, I get it. We need to fix this. Something like, you should not live in fear that next month your paycheck isn't going to be able to cover the mortgage or the rent, and then you're out on your ass the next month.
See, so I think it's that, like, progressive politicians are speaking about generally the right issues. They're just doing it in a backwards. I don't know your policy on swearing. That's why people
swear away.
Long time listen. Okay, they're ass backwards on this then.
CRTC haven't caught us yet. They aren't going to start now.
But like the problem is that they come at legitimate issues in the worst ways possible, right? Like, I'm sorry, a tax cut for the upper 50% is not a way to solve an affordability crisis. It's just plainly not. I'm really sorry to anybody who thinks it is. Now, I can be told privately any number of times that, well, that more's coming. You can't judge yet, Evan, because more's coming. And I'm like, I don't really care if more's coming, because this is what you are choosing to do. But yes, there are legitimate concerns around affordability, about healthcare access, around schools, around whatever. But even when Bonnie Crombie announces a good policy, right? Use the healthcare one, right? They have been saying in the House for weeks now that they have a list of the number of Ontarians by writing who don't have a family doctor. Okay, so why aren't you in a deal? And by the way, throw in Nader Smith, who you should probably do some events with if you would like progressives like me to think that, you actually want our votes. Why are you not going to the top 10 ridings? Why are you not doing the top 5? Why are you not doing a healthcare week, announcing that on a Monday, and then doing, visiting, or they're not following through on any of this. And one policy announcement sometime on a Monday, 6 months or 3 months or 4 months before the eventual election date, is not going to be remembered. Nathaniel Arfin, who's a buddy of mine, I keep having him on the Scrimshaw show. He's written for me a couple times. He worked for Nader. He worked for Nate's campaign. Great guy. Love Nate. But he is a school in his neck of the woods in Burlington had its roof cave in last year, 2 years ago. Don't really remember the details, but the roof caved in. Why is Bonnie Crombie dozens of multiple classes to temporary accommodations because there have water leaks in classrooms or whatever? The elementary school that I went to as a child now has about a dozen porta packs that did not exist when I was a student there. Why is she not doing a tour to talk about these things? Force the press gallery to follow her across the 905, maybe do a couple swings in Ottawa, or just do an Ottawa, everything is crumbling tour, hit ERs that are closing, talk to families that don't have doctors, point out the fact that, by the way, if more people have family doctors, it won't take 10 hours to be seen from admit to being seen by a doctor, not being treated, being seen by a doctor for a dislocated shoulder under Doug Ford. Maybe you could point any of this out. And maybe if you showed up in the press for more than 3 days a month, you would be listened to and people would hear that you care about them instead of popping up and then going away.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see a flaw in that logic.
Yeah. I mean, it's like there are numbers that should be kind of I remember, if you want to talk about centrist politicians stealing votes from the right, Tony Blair, he was the only Labour politician that I can remember as prime minister during my time in the UK. And he was very successful at that policy, which is basically what Crombie's trying to do. He was very successful at it because he had 5 messages that he hammered away at all the time. But those were progressive messages. He wasn't like, oh, we're going to cut taxes. He was like, we're not going to increase taxes. You cast iron promise, we're not going to increase taxes. Didn't say he was going to cut them. But he did give huge amounts of detail on this is what we're going to do with healthcare. This is what we're going to do with education. And it was those progressive touchstones, if you like, that he would hammer on because it was still the progressive vote that he needed to go after, even as he was making his entire being about being literally Tory Plan B, which is the ironic thing about the anagram of his name is I am Tory Plan B.
And the other thing, of course, about Blair is he picked very specific fights with the left to show that he was not your traditional labor leader, but he did not throw the baby, the bathwater, and the bathtub out the window trying to be a centrist. I know you will know what I'm talking about, but there's the famous Clause 4 meeting, right?
Yeah.
And getting rid of it and sort of replacing party language that tied the party to a very left-wing mast. But the thing about Clause 4 was that Clause 4 was fundamentally irrelevant. So nobody except people who cared about that, and it was a way to signal without actually doing anything. And I'm going to use this because I wrote a column a couple weeks ago about this, but Blair's famous truism that he used to appeal to conservative suburbanites, to appeal to the south of England, to appeal to all of these places, was that he was going to be tough on crime and tough on the causes of crime. And the thing about that language, and I would very much like Crombie to adopt literally that verbiage, is Crombie needs a more messaging that works in both Mississauga and Ottawa Centre, right? Both St. Paul's and Oakville. And the reason that I like the tough on crime and tough on the causes of it is that when you're in St. Paul's, when you're in Toronto Centre, when you're in these liberal NDP battlegrounds, you can talk about more money for addiction services. You can talk about more money for supportive housing. You can talk about, more opportunities for young offenders, more diversion programs, more efforts to keep them out of the criminal justice system. You can message all of that stuff and more as being tough on the causes of crime, being tough on poverty, being tough on, being tough on all the on bad educational outcomes, fighting against college, high school dropout rates, whatever. You can message all of that stuff there, and you can also say, but we understand that we're not going to be letting wife beaters and people accused of domestic violence, we're not going to be letting them out on bail because we obviously don't believe that, right? And the thing about that kind of messaging is that you can sell that same very basic message in all of the places that you need to win. And the problem is that when you segment your message to, okay, I have like a 905 message, and then I have an Ottawa message, and I have a Toronto message, and I have a southwest message, and I have a this message, is that you come off inauthentic. And the thing, I want to go back to the earlier point of we elect people. We don't elect spreadsheets. We don't elect party platforms. We don't elect sort of robotic AI assessments. We don't. What we elect are people. And Bonnie Crombie is not seen as credible. And that's not a good thing.
Well, I mean, I was just going to say, she was silent as soon as she got elected, she had this bump in the polls saying, hey, new leader, all eyes are on me. And then, unfortunately, just kind of nothing happened of it. She went silent. She went radar silent and just dove underneath the water and didn't come up for air for months. And in that intervening time, Doug Ford came out and just basically labeled her as this carbon tax liberal, and she was just silent on it. And I'm thinking she wasted 2 years. I don't know doing what. I really don't. I mean, you and I, Roland, had an episode where we said, why isn't she running in Milton, where that should have been an easy win for her, and she should have come back and said, look, Liberals are on the win. We're coming back inch by inch. We're winning. And then she would have had all eyes on her as a leader seat in the legislature at least. But again, that didn't happen. We still don't even know where she's running in Mississauga, presumably. All this stuff is happening.
I can spoil that, by the way, if you want. I believe
Sure.
it's Mississauga Center. I've been told this by enough people that I'm fairly confident I'm right about this.
Okay, but here's the thing. I don't care. Like, nobody cares which riding in Mississauga she fucking runs in. We know it's going to be somewhere in Mississauga. Doug Ford knows it's somewhere in Mississauga. Like, the notion of like, oh, we want to keep Doug on his toes. Like, you really think Doug Ford's
and also
on his
you've
toes?
already announced 4 of your candidates from Mississauga seats,
Right?
Sorry to interrupt.
No, but you're making my point here is that like I don't like the idea is like, oh, we're going to outsmart the Tories. Like, with what? You haven't outsmarted anything yet. This is ridiculous. It nothing about you screams, I'm a decisive leader. This is my vision for Ontario. These are the problems I see, and this is how I'm going to address it. And this as you said, this rebranding, this Bonnie 2.0 that is being pitched to the media, I think is falling flat because it's finally confirming what a lot of progressives, I think, in the party in Ontario at large are feeling is that you're not the person who shares my concerns or what I think we need to do to solve these problems. And if you're on the right, you already got your guy with Doug Ford. Like, I can't imagine if you're a right wing a person, why would you cancel your support of Doug Ford or the progressive conservatives to jump on with Bonnie Crombie? Like, I don't see what's in it for you. And that's why I kind of bring this conversation full circle. What Roland was saying at the start is it's maddening. Like, this just doesn't make any sense. Like, I don't, at this point, we don't know what Bonnie stands for. What's going to be her first thing day one if she was premier that she's going to tackle? Nobody has any clue.
And the thing about politicians in general and leaders in specific is that most people do not pay attention to the nitty-gritty of policy. They know a few things about somebody and they fill in the gaps accordingly, right? Mm-hmm. If you ask most people what a Liberal government or a Labour government in the UK or a Democrat is going to do, they're just going to say the same 4 things. Raise taxes, increase spending on healthcare, in the US it'll be spend more money on education, whatever. And if you ask about the right, they're just going to say cut taxes, cut spending, whatever. Whether the parties involved have pledged that or not, whether they have explicitly said they're not going to, because that's just what people assume. They just assume that if you elect a left-wing party, they're going to raise your taxes, they're going to spend more on healthcare, and they're going to spend more on welfare. Whether you say it or not, whether you believe it or not, that's just what people assume because they take a sense of the party and a sense of the leader and they fill in the gaps. The problem with Bonnie is I have no idea how to fill in any of the gaps. And like, this is
the thing she's doing. The thing she's doing. I mean, I feel that again, to contrast Tony Blair, who as Prime Minister, I am no fan, or as a sort of electoral machine, I think there's lots you can learn from him. But if you look at that very well, remember that phrase, which again, it's almost 30 years ago, and we can still remember that phrase. I certainly remember it, and a couple of other ones extremely well. 30 years later, toughen crime, toughen the causes of crime. It played to the conventional Labour voters. It was like, we're not going to be dumb. We're not going to abandon our core, but we do need to put the minds of the conservative, the people who voted Conservative for the last 4 elections, we need to reassure them. And it did both in one really clever phrase. Tax cut for the rich is like, well, clearly you're just going after votes. Clearly that's just disingenuous. It's dishonest. No one's buying that. We know that you're still a Liberal. If you're really that kind of person, why the hell don't you just go and join the PCs?
Except here's the thing.
It doesn't get that.
Is it dishonest? Because is Bonnie Crombie because the thing about it's not dishonest. It's lacking we don't know what Bonnie Crombie is.
Yeah, I guess, but it's not. I don't think in terms of people sort of considering her as leader and considering changing their vote from how they voted before, or whether they just leave home. Which I think you're absolutely right. The bigger issue is just whether people leave home. It's not who they vote for. um, uh, it doesn't give them a reason to think, okay, yeah, this is something I can get behind. It may not be my perfect leader. It may not, I might want something else in an ideal world. I can get behind this and I'll leave home to cast a vote for this. It's like, it just doesn't, it doesn't sort of persuade you of a core ideology or a core sort of belief system, which I guess is exactly what you're saying. It's the same thing. Just, yeah.
And like this is like a trivial way of making the point, but like there are a lot of ways that you can convey values without conveying policies, right? I have plenty of issues with Kamala Harris's presidential campaign and more so Joe Biden's, but like when she did that video talking to Tim Walz about her music tastes, and she's talking about how she grew up listening to Stevie and Aretha and Miles Davis and John Coltrane, and Walz is telling the story of that Bob Seger 8-track and all of it. I'm like, okay, I have a better sense of who you are as a human being now because of the music that you love, the inspirations that you have, these stories and memories. And like, people like to know things about their leaders, right? There's a reason why Jack Layton, was holding events at bars during Canadians playoff games in 2011. There's a reason that Stephen Harper, one of the ways he would humanize himself is by going and watching his kid play hockey. I have literally seen Stephen Harper in a hockey rink in Canada because I was walking out of playing a game and Stephen Harper is just sitting in the stands, in a rink basically the same as, what my mother and my father were doing 20 minutes earlier. And like he would, that would happen and he would humanize himself and he would show who he was. And he was a nerd about the history of hockey and all that. What is Bonnie Crombie's equivalent? What is the music that makes her tick? What is her great family memory? What is her call to public service? What is any of it? Give me something.
Apparently it's rock climbing. We've heard it's rock climbing is her passion and her the thing that she does to de-stress when not on the
true. If that's true, we should all know that by now because that is an interesting thing and it's completely counter to the image of her that everybody has. It's like Kathleen winning and the running, right? It humanized her and gave you a sense of the human being. And you're absolutely right. We don't. Yeah, anything interesting about Bonnie Crombie would be a step forward. Other than like just been in politics a long time.
One of Trudeau's, one of the funniest moments of Justin Trudeau's political career was during the 2015 campaign. That was the year the Blue Jays made those trades and they were really, really good. They were making their run. And every time one of the leaders would go to the game, they would lose. And that was basically the only time they would lose that entire playoff run. And he tweets, it's a great tweet. I assume it's still up, but he just tweets at Bulgaire and Trudeau and goes, guys, I think we're the problem. We should probably call a truce on going to any more games. And it's the funniest he's ever been. And it's the most sincere he's ever been. And for a fact he sent that tweet, right?
Yeah.
And it's like those kinds of humanizing moments are good for politicians. And like if rock climbing is your thing, great. If whatever like Bonnie, show me your Spotify rap, Bonnie. Show me, because at least if depending on what the music taste is or what novels you read growing up or the fact that you like really loved or really hated, like, I don't know, Catcher in the Rye or Gatsby or one of the great classics, that tells me a lot, right? 30 seconds of Bonnie Crombie telling me why she really loves Jackson Browne or whoever would honestly be worth millions of dollars compared to these sort of like pre-canned, actually, I've always opposed a carbon tax, even though I ran for Stéphane Dion and said we need a carbon price in 2008. Give us something so that we can understand what you care about and we can fill in these gaps.
But here's my question. is it too little, too late now? Like I want to know, like we on this podcast, and this might sound like sour grapes, Roland. If it is, I apologize for speaking for you. But when Bonnie was mayor, we asked her many a times to come on this podcast to talk about one thing or another. She finally did agree during the Peel dissolution agreement that she managed to get, and then Doug Ford reneged on that. We asked her again to come on this podcast when she decided to run as Liberal leader. We had all the leaders on. We had Nate, Adil, Yasser, and everyone else, Ted as well. And we asked Bonnie. She gave us a flat out no. And I said, fine, it is what it is. But again, you don't have a lot of vehicles to get your message out there. We're giving you a half hour or an hour to just jam. Everybody else gave us this. It was interesting. We found things we liked about some, didn't like about others, but everyone was humanized. What we also found was when the minute we turned off the camera, or we stopped recording, the person who was on the other end was like 100% more interesting than the person we just interviewed, 9 times out of 10. And I was like, guys, there's a lesson to be learned here, but we won't get into that. But again, like any chance that Bonnie has to come out and give us the real her, why do you want this job other than I can be premier instead of Doug Ford, is lost on me. And I'm thinking at this point, I'll be honest, if she called us up tomorrow and said, can I come on for an episode? Well, yeah, okay, we'll give her the half hour, but I'll be honest, I'll be like, what are you going to talk about?
So I read about this a bunch in Thursday's piece, because I somehow was like, oh, I'm gonna write about the stuff since I read it on Sunday. That turns into 2,600 words because I have a lot of thoughts on this. And like, I'm not saying Bonnie Crombie needed to give me time, right? I'm not saying that somebody on her team needed to give me 30 minutes, right? I'm not saying that I'm whatever. But the thing about Bonnie is that if you're pivoting to the right, if you are pivoting to the center, pivoting to the right, whatever, you need progressive guarantors. You need people who are going to speak to your values, speak to your progressive bona fides, and reassure swing liberal NDP voters, people who voted for Justin Trudeau, who think, honestly, you're not liberal enough for me, right? And who are considering voting NDP. You need people like me, and I'm not saying I'm the only one, and you guys are fill a similar void in that sort of ideological sense, ideological positioning. But like, why is she not reaching out to these people, giving you guys 30, 45 an hour, talking to me for 30 minutes, giving me a column of quotes or whatever? Because let's just be very real. You're likely to buy some goodwill from people who you interact with, who you engage with, who you are in conversation with. And again, I'm not saying anything about me or you specifically, but this idea that Crombie is pivoting to the right without having done anything to shore up her left flank, to keep people in the tent, to make it so that I am out here being like, guys, relax. She is committed to a progressive message. This is electoral politics, which if I genuinely believed that she was a progressive, I'd be writing. I'd be saying this, I'd be saying, trust me, trust the process. We need to win, because spoiler alert, I am a leading pragmatic progressive. I believe in pragmatism. I believe in doing what you need to win. And she did none of that work. And so now when she pivots to the right, people like me, people like you, people with platforms, people with engaged audiences of fellow swing ONDP, OLP voters look at her and say, oh, well, I mean, I guess Styles doesn't look quite as bad now. And that's not good enough.
Well, that's just it. I mean, that I don't know what else to say to that other than I get the sense the I'm going to say it. I'm going to predict it. Whenever the election is held next year, all things being what they are, the Liberals get shut out of the 905. That's my prediction. You're going to see the Liberals completely shut out of the 905. And they're going to be right back where they were at the start of this thing. I do think they'll be able to rebuild the party, because my take is Doug Ford won on 17% of the electorate supporting him. That means there's 83% that are winnable. It's harder to win them over, but that's where your votes are. You have to go after them somehow. Or you can fight over 17% of people to make decisions. Good luck to you.
The other thing I have to complain about, because I have not had a chance to vocalize this fact yet, and so you guys are just the recipients or victims of this. I'm really sorry. This, the early election is screwing us. We were expecting, we thought we had a 4-year timeline to plan. We thought we had till 2026. Maybe if you were polling better, the election would be in 2026. Have you thought about that? Maybe if you were polling like Stephen Del Duca managed to poll the entire time. Stephen, I'm going to get 24% of the vote in 8 seats, Del Duca. So again, not a particularly impressive achievement. Although, to be fair, great job cutting those development charges in Vaughan. Good job by you. But maybe if you were polling better, there wouldn't be an election in 2025, and Nick Kuvelis wouldn't be rubbing his hands together at the opportunity of locking in former years of majority government for basically free, because he doesn't have an opposition. So no, this early election. No, the reason the election's early is because you have singularly wasted a year of her leadership. That's why. It's on you.
Yeah, and you've absolutely, as leader of an opposition party, if there are rumors that the government is going to go early, what you say is bring it on, because we're going to kick your ass, whether you believe it or not. That's what you damn well say. I remember Michael Foot in the early 80s, who got absolutely destroyed by Margaret Thatcher, who would be saying, we demand election tomorrow. It's like, well, if you have an election tomorrow, you're going to be exterminated from the face of the earth. But he said that because that's what you say. You got to show confidence in your own ability. When you say garbage like that, all you're saying is, I don't think we can win. And that is, even people who don't follow politics get that message. You're saying, oh, it's not fair. We can't win because you're not playing by the rules that we want. Grow up. But it's the most depressing period of politics in my entire life, because I've never seen such a woeful set of politicians vying for government. It's pathetic. After two terms of PC government, no one's really suspecting that Doug Ford won't win again easily. And my God. Anyway, I think we've been speaking for quite a while. So Evan Scrimshaw, thanks so much for joining us today. I really appreciate your insight, and we'll no doubt probably speak again in the future, and perhaps we'll all be proved wrong. And I suspect all three of us would be happy if we are proved wrong. I just don't think it's going to happen. As I read at the end of Thursday's column, I would love to be wrong about Bonnie. I would love to be. I have Karen McCrimmon as my MPP. I would love to be proud to cast I'm going to vote for her. She is the correct tactical choice in Canada Carleton. I would love to be proud of the vote I'm about to cast. There is almost a 0% chance I will feel good casting that ballot.
All right.
Thanks so much, Adam.
Thanks for having me.
That's it for this episode of the 905er. Thank you for listening. As always, you can send us your feedback, thoughts, and concerns, or ideas for future episodes to our email, info@905er.ca. We'd love to hear from you. You can help us keep the 905er going by financially supporting us through Patreon as well as PayPal. Visit us at 905er.ca and click on the support tab. As well, links are in the show notes for your convenience. Lastly, you can find us on social media. Search for _905er on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. So long for now. See you next time.